Welcome to Wellesbourne Mountford aerodrome in Shakespeare's leafy county of Warwickshire. We are in fact only a few miles east of the Bard's hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon, and I'm sat here in Cessna 152 at the South Warwickshire Flying School, which is based at the northern end of the runway. I'm a real life pilot, and I thought I'd give you a circuit. I've been inspired by flying Theston's circuits, and a couple of acknowledgements. I have actually downloaded his scenery file for Wellesbourne Mountford and also the modified 152X. So now let's move on. First thing to do is to set the mixture to rich, and then to check the throw of the throttle and set it to about 1/4 of an inch open. Now test the carburet heater for full and free movement. That's fine, set to cold. And controls: elevator, aileron and rudder. Next thing is to check the trim. The 152 in real life only has a mechanical trim, but it has got an electrical one on the sim, so I'll turn the power on so we can use electric trim. And now I'm putting full down trim. And then moving to full up. Before resetting it back to takeoff trim. You notice that I started with the flaps down. That's so we can check the linkage and also check the operation of the flaps when we before in the pre-flight checks. So I'm now going to go through the checklist, and the first thing, which I keep forgetting to do in the sim and occasionally in real life, is to turn the fuel on, and then wonder why the engine won't start. The engine's cold, so we'll give it about 3 strokes of the primer, which puts neat petrol into the cylinders. And now we can start the engine. And hopefully it will start first time. It has. Engine T's and P's are in the green. Now put the oil revs up to about 1200. And turn the alternator on and check the ammeter discharging. That appears to go the wrong way on the sim. It looks as though it's discharging, but in real life it would be charging. Check that the radio is set to Wellesbourne 124.030. Flaps up now, so we can check they're operating. We should really be looking at them to check they're operating symmetrically, but on the 152 the flaps are operated by a single motor, so they either work or they don't work. Now I want to set the altimeter to the QFE setting, which means that we're measuring height above the aerodrome level rather than altitude above sea level. Transponder is set to on, or standby for the moment, and we'll put it to on when we get to the runway threshold. And at this point I will make a radio call. We're going to assume that there is no air traffic control because I don't like the default one, so I'll make blind radio calls. Wellesbourne traffic, Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India, is at the South Warwickshire Flying School at the north end of the airfield, taxiing to holding point Echo for runway 36, left-hand circuit. And here we're doing some turns to check the AI is turning, the turn and bank is operating, the DI is stationary. No, I got that the wrong way around. I also check the brakes, the toe brakes, they seem to be operating fine. So now we can taxi to the full length of the airfield to the holding point Echo, which is at the southern end of the runway. We're going to use runway 36, which has a noise abatement climb out. I'll say a little bit more about that as we get to the runway threshold. Taxiing a bit too fast, we've got to be careful and slow down here, otherwise we get told off by Frankie in the tower for taxiing too quickly. The default buildings here aren't too bad, they're a little bit too new, they're a bit more broken down in practice. Hello, what's this chap doing? Oh my goodness me. The ground traffic here doesn't seem to have any idea of giving way to aircraft. So I guess we're going to just have to go to the right here onto the hard standing to give this chap a little bit more clearance. Tower up on the right is in the right position, but nothing like as modern as it's shown there. And the building on the right here should be the touchdown cafe, not sort of loading bay, so that is totally wrong. The big hangar at the far end is Heliair, and that's about right. It is quite a large hangar, they've got quite a modern hangar, so that's good. Car park is correct, certainly. So we're now coming up to the runway 05 crossing. Although it's not active, we do take care to make sure some idiot isn't trying to land on it, so we have a look both ways to check there's nobody landing. In real life we would need clearance from air traffic control to cross this, but we don't have air traffic control operating at the moment, so we just have a good look. We're crossing 05 now, and then moving round to the holding point where we'll do our power checks. There's virtually no wind today, but we'll turn approximately into the northwesterly direction, which is going to give us good clearance behind. And so we turn into wind. We don't normally go onto the grass, I couldn't slow down in time. Parking brake on. Okay, so now we have a good look behind to make sure there's nobody behind us. It's very bad form to spray aircraft behind you with gravel. That's fine, nobody behind. 1200 revs, brakes holding. Increase the power to 1700. And then activate carburetor heat. Now the carburetor heat actually restricts the flow of air to the cylinders, and so the mixture is not quite right, and so we do see some drop off in revs. There shouldn't be too much, about 50 revs, so that's fine. And then we put that back to cold, and now try the magnetos. Now there are two magnetos, each firing 2 plugs per cylinder, so there are 16 plugs in total. The engine should operate with either magneto, but to ensure that it does, we have to switch one off at a time and then switch the other off, to make sure it operates. Again, the engine doesn't run quite as efficiently on one magneto as two, so in real life we'd see a small drop in revs. On the sim there doesn't seem to be very much, so that's fine. And then we run the engine back to idle. Make sure it's running at about 700 to 800 revs. It doesn't want to run too fast, otherwise it would impede our descent, and we don't want it to stop. And also check that such suction is registering. This drives air-driven instruments such as the attitude indicator. So final checks now. Pre-takeoff checks. With fuel shut-off valve is on. We've got fuel sufficient for the sortie. The trimmer is set. Flaps are up, mixture is rich, throttle friction is set, carburetor heat is cold, magnetos both on, master switches both on, primer is locked, instruments and gyros are set, radio is set to Wellesbourne, doors, windows and harnesses secure, flying controls full and free. Got the beacon on, but we'll switch the strobe on, and also the landing light, because it costs nothing and it gives it increased visibility. And finally we switch the transponder to alt so that it's giving altitude information as well as position information. And we don't need the pitot heat, and that's fine. So now we continue the turn, have a good look on the base leg and file to see if there's any aircraft approaching. And taxi up to the holding point and give a final call. Wellesbourne traffic, Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India is at Echo for runway 36. And Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India is lining up runway 36. As we get onto the runway, then we want to stop and just check that DI is aligned with the runway. This runway is north-south, so we check that DI is set to 360, which it is, and now we apply full throttle smoothly. And as we're getting faster, we check that we've got full revs, we've got good revs, T's and P's are in the green, and airspeed is increasing. And as we get to about 55 knots, then we rotate. Make sure that we get a safe height, positive rate, and now we're going to make the noise abatement turn, which is onto 030. This is to avoid the village of Charcot, which is only about half a mile at the northern end of the runway, so they get a bit fed up when we fly over the top of them, not surprisingly. So we're now on 030, climbing at a rate of about 600 feet per minute, airspeed's about 70 knots. Dip the nose to make sure that there's nobody in our out of visibility in the engine. Continue the climb, and we're going to climb on this heading to about 1,000 feet. After takeoff checks, flaps are up, T's and P's are good, and the landing lights will leave on. Right, coming up to 1,000 feet, so the first thing is attitude. The attitude back to level. Then reduce the power to about just over 2,000, about 2,100 revs. And before we do the trim, we'll start the turn. And we want to turn on the heading of 270, which is the crosswind leg. Okay, coming on to 270, and now we set the trim to give us more or less straight and level, we hope, at 1,000 feet, 270 and 90 knots. And if we check out to the left, we can see that we're just about crossing the runway threshold, the runway extension should I say, which is good. Now we want to be about a mile to the west before we do our downwind turn. We can time this at 90 knots, it would take about 40 seconds, so at 35 seconds we would start the turn. Oh, we're nicely set now at just about 90 knots, 1,000 feet. Now we'll have a quick look to the left, raise the left wing so that we don't block it, raise the right wing so we look that way, and then commence a gentle turn onto the downwind leg. So nicely established on the downwind leg, so now do the pre-landing checks, the bumpy checks. So brakes are off, undercrown is down, welded, mixture is rich, flaps are up, fuel is on and sufficient for a go-around if necessary, instruments are reading correctly, and we'll try the carburetor heat. Just make sure that we haven't collected any ice. And that's good. And if we look out, we see that we're nicely adjacent to the runway on the downwind leg, so now we'll give a downwind call. Wellesbourne traffic, Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India, downwind, runway 36, left hand. So this is one time at the circuit when you get to admire the scenery a little bit. So we're going to continue downwind until we get to a little development just down here. It isn't Loxley. Loxley's further over to the left, but it's an extension of Loxley, and we want to avoid turning them. But in fact, if we go just past and then commence the base leg turn at that point, that's about right. Nicely set up, 1,000 feet, 90 knots, T's and P's are in the green, and there's Loxley over to there, and there's the development I was mentioning. We're just about to go past it, so then we'll start our turn onto base. So we reduce the throttle to about 1500 revs. And apply carburetor heat because we're then outside the green zone, and so there's a risk of carb icing. Commencing the turn, holding the nose up so that the speed drops off into the white zone, which is the flap safe zone. Rolling out now onto 090, which is the base leg. Now we can put the first two stages of flaps down. And in fact now, if we let go of the controls, then we should find out that we're descending quite nicely. And there's the runway, so we'll commence the turn on to final. 500 feet descent, which is about right, 65 knots. We've overshot the centre line slightly, but not much, so that's fine. In the final stage of flaps, so we've got full flaps now, quite draggy now, so we'll probably need a little bit more power just to compensate for the drag. Nicely stabilised approach. So we're on final for the runway 36, the runway is clear and we are stabilised, so Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India, final 36, full stop landing. Okay, we're just slightly off the centre line. Descending 500 feet per minute, T's and P's are fine. Head on white. And crossing the threshold now, we drop off the throttle and flare. And settle onto the runway. Drifting off to the left a little bit, just compensate. And now at this point I would normally put the flaps up to make sure they don't take off again, and also put the carburetor heat back to cold so we don't pick any dust, because the air is unfiltered when you've got carburetor heat applied, and that would mean the dust would go straight into the cylinders. So we're going to exit at Bravo, which is here. Wellesbourne traffic, Golf Bravo Hotel Uniform India vacated. Okay, so now we stop.
Echo Golf Bravo Whiskey traffic Cessnikov. Bravo Hotel Uniform India is clear of the runway.
I've just said that. Okay,
Echo Golf Bravo Whiskey traffic Cessnikov. Bravo Hotel Uniform India is clear of the runway.
Turn off the landing light and the strobes, leave the beacon on. So now we'll taxi back to parking. Check there's no traffic. And this is actually a good representation of Wellesbourne. It looks very realistic now, apart from the flying school, which should be single story It should be white and it should have windows, but apart from that it doesn't look too bad. The Vulcan looks good though. That is really good. And the car park is correct, that's good. There's obviously an event on because they don't normally have many cars in that. As I say, the flying school there on the left is wrong, but apart from that the various huts and things are about right. There's a really active group at the Vulcan Club. So now we're going to turn round and head south. That's the normal way we do it. We've got 4 parking spots. We have 4 similar 152s plus a variety of other aircraft at the club. So the brake here. Brakes on. Throttle up to 1700 to clear the plugs before we switch off. Make sure we don't leave any grime on the plugs. Few seconds of that, and then back to 1200 and mixture back to lean, and then for some reason it goes back to start. So thank you for watching.